Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Sarah Kleiner at carnivore.yogi on Instagram is a yoga instructor, autism mother, and meditation support group leader for parents with children with autism. Sarah is also an ex-vegan healing from PCOS, adrenal fatigue, depression, IBS, and eczema. She's lost 100 pounds 3 separate times in her life. Sarah shares amazing, honest, practical, and helpful content on her Instagram page. Thanks for coming on the show, Sarah.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Scott. Thanks for that awesome intro.
Yeah, of course. And Sarah, maybe if we could start with just how did you find veganism? I think that's something you haven't exactly mentioned on other interviews I've heard you on.
Yeah. So I decided to go to yoga teacher training in 2011, I believe it was. And honestly, I just kind of thought it was like part of the deal of like, I'm going to be a yoga teacher. I really want to be in this lifestyle. And, I just thought it was kind of required. And so right about the same time that I went into yoga teacher training, I got heavily into veganism. I was soaking everything and trying to, my purse was like a little mini cabinet of supplements. I was trying to do everything correctly. So it was really just part of my evolution as a yogi, something I thought that I had to do. So that's how I got hooked into veganism. Yeah,
really interesting. And I'm sure folks will be curious, but losing 100 pounds 3 separate times, that's quite the claim. Can you talk about, what each of those were? And then maybe we can, transition from that into more modern day, why you decided to share your story on Instagram.
Yeah. So I have had food addiction since I can remember, since being a really little kid. I was very much, addicted to sugar and carbs, and food was a reward. I remember my mom would show up from school. You had a bad day. Here's an RC Cola and a moon pie. That it was just our reward system. Or, you're having trouble going to sleep. Let me make you a milkshake. And, I know my mom was just kind of doing her best. So I kind of have forgiven that through lots of therapy. It's what we do as parents. We just try to do our best at the time. But I grew up heavily addicted to sugar and food. And it was like, and I actually just had a therapy session, and we were talking about how my brain wasn't really quite formed yet. I formed those addictive pathways with food, of like, here's an emotion, let's eat. So from a very young age, like my brain didn't really develop properly because I was always stunting it with food. So the first time I lost 100 pounds, I was 14 or 15 years old. I was, had just gotten into high school and decided I was just going to diet, and I did. And I worked really hard. One thing I'm good at is just sticking to a plan. It's what happens afterwards,
Yeah.
So I lost all that weight the first time, and then, I gained it all back when I was 18. My father passed away and my mom got cancer that same exact year. And
oh my gosh.
It was very traumatic. It was very difficult. And, there was food for me. It was right there for me. It's like, okay. So I quickly gained all of that weight back, when I was 18, 19 years old, very quickly. And, so that was, then I had to lose it again. Once everything kind of settled down, I had to go back and lose that weight again. When I was 19, 20, I decided I was going to get into running, and I started running marathons and getting really into working out. And then the third time was my weight had kind of slowly been creeping up in my 20s, but I got pregnant with my daughter, and pregnancy was like my license to eat. And so when I gave birth to my daughter, like 235 pounds. And I was like, okay, I'm having a girl, I'm having a daughter. I don't want to raise a child watching me do this to myself, you know? So I took her in her little baby carrier. We went to Weight Watchers, and that was that third time that I lost 100 pounds. And that was, 11 years ago. And I was like, I'm not going to do this again. So really the last, I would say 10, 11 years since I lost that 100 pounds that third time, has been like, how do I manage this? How do I deal with this addictive stuff? And that's been my journey that kind of led me to carnivore about a year ago. So
that's great. And how did you first come across carnivore? And is that when you started sharing your story on Instagram as well?
Yeah, I started sharing my story right from day one. So if anyone goes on my profile, it's kind of like I'm in the beginning, and you can see some of my really, really early posts. I'm kind of complaining, going through adaptation.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I started that Instagram profile right when I started carnivore because I needed community. I needed some support because I was like, this is really weird what I'm doing. No one else is doing this. So I really, that's why I started that account. But the reason I started carnivore was a friend of mine who is also a functional medicine doctor. She recommended, her name's Dr. Rimka. She actually told me that it's something I might want to try because I was just desperate. I had some really suboptimal labs. I was struggling with PCOS. My depression was really out of control. And I was just kind of at the end of my rope, right about November of last year, of 2018. And she's a friend of mine. We kind of run in the same circles. And she had been on carnivore for 5 months. And when she first said that to me, I was like, that's really the craziest thing, kind of like we hear about.
Yeah.
That's really crazy, not eating any vegetables, because I thought that the vegetables are what was going to keep us healthy. And that's, eat your greens. That I was just brainwashed into believing that and just eat a little bit of meat. So she's like, just try it out. I think it's going to help you with a lot of stuff that you're dealing with right now. And, of course, the plan was for me to try it for 30 days. And it was I got through those 30 days and I was like, wow, I just want to keep going with this because it alleviated so many other things that I just didn't expect that it was going to alleviate. And I was like, wow, I kind of want to keep going with this,
Yeah, that's great. And I find it so interesting that you found it through your doctor. And Judy mentioned this in your interview with her as well, that most people are battling their doctors, trying to convince them that carnivore is okay and that they're not going to die or get scurvy or something like that. But it was the opposite for you.
Yeah, I've been really lucky to have Dr. Rimka. She's kind of I consider her kind of my coach, and I bounce stuff off her, and she's got me doing a lot of weird biohacking stuff now, which is kind of fun, 10 months into the journey here. But yeah, it's been awesome to have her as a resource because otherwise I never would have considered it ever.
Yeah, I'm sure. And maybe now would be a good time to talk about kind of what your version of carnivore looks like. What do you eat in a day? How do you think about things? We can just start with that, and then I can ask follow-up questions about things like supplements, bone broth, coffee, etc.
Yeah. So right now, and I said this with Judy on her interview as well, it keeps changing and keeps evolving. And if you watch my page and go back through old posts, you're like, okay, this girl is just doing so many things. Right now, I really enjoy having some breakfast at least 5 days a week. My breakfast right now is 3 ounces of raw liver and maybe 1.5 ounces of raw beef suet. That seems to work really well for me. It's not too much, but it's enough to kind of get me, just get me going. And that raw liver has been awesome. Then I'll do a lunch, which a lot of times is maybe 6 ounces or so of New York strip or ribeye. I do all grass fed. And then I like to eat salmon roe. raw beef suet. I love raw bone marrow right now. And a lot of times I'll do dinner, like something similar to that lunch meal. And I'll have bone broth if I'm still like, I'm not really hungry, but I would like a little something. I'll do like a cup of bone broth during the afternoon as well.
Very cool. Yeah, sounds like a very well-rounded, nutrient-dense, nose-to-tail approach. And what about coffee and supplements? Do you use any of those?
I do still drink black coffee. I was doing coffee with ghee for many, many months. And I just, over the last month, I decided I was going to because I've been dairy free for a few months now. But I decided I'd see what it would be like to not have the ghee in my coffee. And so just taking out the ghee has made me cut down on the amount of coffee that I'm drinking. So I'm probably like 1 or 2 cups of black coffee in the morning, and that's it. Like I cut myself off after 9 a.m., no coffee. I'd eventually love to give it up, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And how about supplements? Are you taking anything to augment the diet? Anything like magnesium?
I do take magnesium glycinate in the evenings, just like an hour or so before bed. And I've actually really come off of most of the supplements. I did add vitamin D3 back in just a couple weeks ago, because the light changed and the days are getting shorter, and I'm, live on the East Coast. And so I think we get a bit less sunlight, and I've always been low on the D3. So I did add that back in. But yeah, that's really it. It's crazy. I was taking probably like $500 a month worth of supplements before I started carnivore, for my adrenals and my thyroid and depression and just like a host of stuff I was just trying to manage with all those supplements. And when I went carnivore, I kind of just went off of it and didn't really have any issues. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And how about raw carnivore? What's led you towards eating more raw foods? And how has that affected you?
Honestly, kind of by accident. A lot of people ask me why I'm doing raw liver and why raw this, that, and the other. And the raw liver was literally just because I can't stand the taste of cooked liver.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I just don't like it. And I've tried to make pate. The Ketogenic Girl's got an awesome pate recipe that I tried, but then it just sat in my fridge for a month until I just had to throw it out because no one else in my house will eat it. So I really tried a lot of different liver recipes and really didn't like them. So that's why the liver is raw. And the suet, you can't really eat that if it's cooked. It'll like render down. And the bone marrow, I really love eating raw bone marrow. It's almost got kind of a sweet taste to it. I do cook it every now and then, but I kind of just prefer it that way. So I'd like to say it's some big scientific thing of like losing nutrients, but it's just, and I'm sure there's validity to that, but I am not the expert on, on that type of thing. It's just kind of how I prefer to eat it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I can't do raw steaks, just because of the chew factor, and also just a nice seared steak is amazing. But I'm totally with you on fats and liver as well. I just really prefer them raw. I know they are somewhat more bioavailable, and like you said, if you start rendering the suet, it can cause digestive issues. But yeah, totally. Those foods, for me, it makes sense to not cook them if, they're well sourced and you're freezing them beforehand to get rid of bacteria and all those things.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I buy from a lot of stuff from White Oak Pastures because I'm in Atlanta, so I'm about 2 hours north of them. So it's really easy. I don't have to pay shipping. There's a CSA pickup in town.
Oh, cool.
So I'll place a big order and then I'll just go pick it up on like Thursday afternoon. I don't have to pay for shipping. So that's where I get a lot of my stuff. And I love supporting, maybe it's the ex-vegan in me, but I'm like, I got to do 100% grass fed, and I'm really big on supporting regenerative farming. And I think that's kind of for me, it's very important. I don't judge people who aren't there yet as carnivores, but for me, it's just something that in my heart, I feel like I should support. So I'm lucky that they're so close.
Yeah, I'm jealous. And you mentioned the specific amounts of the suet. How do you measure the suet? Because that's one thing I struggle with. I think my body is just not used to eating raw fat. So the first time I introduced it, I would eat like steak size portions of suet at meals. And maybe like a fist worth, which is a lot, maybe like 5 or 6 ounces. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like I feel like fuller and kind of hot after my meals. Like I was probably eating like thousands of calories of this stuff. And then, lo and behold, like after a few days or a few weeks of that, in the middle of the night, I would start getting these digestive issues. But it seems like people who do the raw suet well and consistently, like the Strong Sisters and you, are very intentional about like exactly how much you're putting on your plate. So do you measure that very precisely?
I do. From back in my Weight Watchers days, I have a little food scale. So I'll eat about 1.5 ounces at a time, just with my steak a lot of the time. But yeah, I do measure it. I try not to eat more than 4 ounces per day because it is so calorically dense and nutritionally dense that you don't really need more than that. And then so I weigh it out on that little scale. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's smart. And talk about fasting. I know you've mentioned it before and why you're not doing it as much anymore. Why is that?
Yeah, I really love fasting. My addictive brain absolutely loves being in that fasted state and not eating for a few days. It feels really awesome. But I did too much fasting and lost my cycle. And as a woman, that's kind of your marker of the regularity of your cycle, is basically telling you your body's like, okay, we can, get pregnant. We can continue the species, or I think I'm dying, like that, let's stop. Let's stop having that biological response that we're supposed to have. And so my cycle started getting really irregular, and then I lost it altogether for a couple of months. So Dr. Rimka actually, she was like, okay, I never told you to do a 6.5 day water fast. Number one, that was a little much. Number two, let's cut back on that and not fast again, maybe, for another 6 months. She says I probably have some more healing to do. Just, I've had a lot of internal healing from this diet. I had cysts that were covering my ovaries, that we found on an ultrasound before I started carnivore. That was very painful. And she's like, your body's done a lot of internal healing. You probably have a lot more to do. And I think for some women, it can be a bit counterproductive because and I'm 40. So my hormones are already starting to shift and change from, someone who's maybe 35 or 30. So that is why I've kind of cut out a lot of I still do IF, it just happens naturally. But no more 72, 48, 6.5 days. It was fun while it lasted, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can certainly see how it's a bit of an addiction, but I think people often push it too far. And maybe you can just talk a little bit in general, Sarah, about tinkering and finding what works well for you, because it seems like you've really mastered that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we do in carnivore. And what I was actually about to say about the fasting is like, it's almost kind of trendy right now. There's a lot of stuff on the carnivore, like Instagram community that trends, like fasting is a huge trend. I think there's a push. A lot of people are talking more about doing higher fat ratios. So I think the first time I started thinking about doing the higher fat ratios, I actually heard Josh Blackburn on your podcast. And then it kind of got my ears perked up about PKD. A lot of people are talking about PKD right now. So I've kind of played around with just doing, the high fat ratio, the 2-to-1 fat ratio. My body does well with it as long as I keep the fats, as like beef suet and the raw bone marrow. I handle those well. The times where I've tried to do like 80, ground beef, a lot of ground beef, I don't handle that so well. Or if I'm doing like a lot of rendered fat, my body doesn't handle that so well. Eating at different times of the day, I do better if I have a breakfast, cut my eating window off at like 3 or 4. I sleep better. My energy's better. My adrenals function a lot better that way. But it's been a lot of tinkering over the last, almost year now of like, should I do an OMAD? And I don't do well with OMAD either, physically or mentally. It doesn't work well for me. So, I find that 2, sometimes 3 meals, if I need that third meal, I'll do it, works best for me. And when I'm working out, especially, I usually need that third meal as well.
Yep. And how did yoga and meditation come into the picture, or how do you think they can help round out, this lifestyle?
Yeah, so I think a lot of us that come to carnivore, I can't speak for everyone. I can speak for myself. I found a lot of relief from addiction. I have a history with alcohol addiction, but with food addiction, I have a major history with that as well. And it kind of calms the brain down quite a bit. So a lot of the noise that we have around food, I think carnivore is just amazingly therapeutic for that. You get the tyrosine, you've got there's neurotransmitters are really, really supported by this way of eating all that fat. So what I see yoga and meditation as, and that my kind of the way I look at yoga and meditation has shifted and changed over the last 12 years or so, is it's just another layer of brain support, of neurotransmitter support, being really able to access your full brain. When you're an addiction, you're acting a lot out of your fight flight portion of your brain, the amygdala. It's like that, that back brain is kind of running the show. So what yoga and meditation can really do is give you more access, kind of calm down that fight flight thing that's going on and give you more access to your frontal lobe. So you really get into executive functioning. You can make better decisions. So not necessarily just around food, but just in your whole life. So I think it's kind of an enhancement for that, can help a lot of people, especially when they're trying to transition over as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And it's certainly changed my life. I've been consistently meditating, I think since I was 15, so over 10 years. It's evolved a lot, the way I practice it, how I practice it. But it's always had a profound impact on my life, and I think changed me for the better as a person, perhaps even more than my diet.
Oh, I believe so. I was able to stop, I think carnivore has helped me stay off of all medication, but I was able to stop taking medication for depression and anxiety and sleep when I started consistently meditating. It was like, yeah, now staying off medication is another thing. I think carnivore helps me with that, because it gives my brain the support that it needs. But that meditation was the first thing that made my brain just kind of calm down and be able to cope with life on life's terms a bit more.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And can you talk about fight and flight and how that changes with meditation? And then I've also heard you do a really good job articulating the physical changes that happen to the brain with meditation.
Yeah, I love science. I love learning these little facts about how the brain works. And there was a study done at Harvard in 2012 where they did imaging of the brain for the subjects that participated in the study, and it showed over 8 weeks, just meditating as little as 9 minutes a day actually shrunk the amygdala. The amygdala is the fight flight portion of your brain. It actually made it smaller, and it increased and thickened the cortex. And the cortex is like our empathy, compassion. It gives us access to frontal lobe, executive functioning, all of that. So what I tell people that are maybe having a difficult time getting motivated enough to try meditation is that, this study definitively showed that just 8 weeks of meditation for 9 minutes a day actually changed the physical structure of the brain. So you're able to shrink the amygdala, that fight flight portion. So you're not as reactive. You'll find that things, for me, when I started meditating consistently, stuff that would make me have a physical reaction that I had no control over. I would just get really angry, and it would happen boom, 1 second flat. when I started meditating very consistently, the space between stimulus and response, I actually had a choice as to how I was going to react. Now, sometimes I still act like a jerk. I'm not even going to.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not going to act like I'm perfect. I still screw up, but I usually have a little bit more of a choice as to whether or not I'm going to take that action. So.
Yeah. And what are some of the benefits people experience with that change in brain function, out like across all aspects of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, so much. I think the biggest one, like I just mentioned, is that whole reaction time. I think that a lot of people that have, like me, like addictive personalities, I think anybody that has a history with addiction or that they're struggling to maybe kind of recover from addiction, that meditation is so important because it's going to cut down on, it's just going to kind of regrow that part of your brain that addiction has worn down over the time. So that the ability to kind of regrow your brain and that neuroplasticity is amazing. I think a lot of people find that they're more able to have empathy for others, able to relate instead of just thinking, about what can I get out of the situation all the time. They're able to actually ask someone genuinely how they're doing and get out of themselves. So that, not to get too woo-woo or anything, but that feeling that we're all connected, that we all have something to offer one another and just a more of like a love for other people instead of being so antagonistic or worrying about getting ahead. A lot of that kind of just calms down and goes away for a lot of people when they start meditating.
Yeah, absolutely. And shifting topics back to carnivore a bit, Sarah, can you talk about how carnivore works with you and your family?
Absolutely. So my daughter is 11. She'll be 12 in December. She's nonverbal autistic, so she doesn't speak. And for her, I keep her diet very meat heavy, almost kind of keto. I do let her have some fruits. But I used to be the mom that would push the vegetables and say, you have to eat your, spinach, you got to eat your kale. But now it's like, you got to eat the meat first. So she knows she's got to eat her meat. So she does a lot of meat. My husband's not carnivore, but he does eat steak every night with me. So they, they're not carnivore, but they are very meat heavy, and they've kind of adjusted that way. Whereas before I would make them, stuff collard greens down their throat and kind of force that onto them. And I think that they're a lot happier with mom not pushing vegetables so much. So yeah, they eat meat with me.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how do different foods affect your daughter with autism?
Yeah, so I see a direct correlation with food, and it is difficult because she's autistic and, we just talked about meditation and the brain. I understand her brain with autism is different. The way autism manifests in her is that she says she doesn't have control over her body a lot of the time. And that gets way, way worse with food. So it's difficult to go to, parties and out to eat and different places where there's food that just is kind of laying out and available, because she doesn't have a lot of motor control. She's just going to grab it. Her impulse control is like, forget it. And so, the last really bad incident we had with her in food was at my father-in-law's birthday party back in February, and there was bagels and cake and just sugar and that's just family gatherings for us. And she just, we were like, okay, fine, we'll just let her have a little bit. And it was 3 days that she was hysterical, crying, just a mess, and we had to drag her out. And she's 5'2", 110 pounds. Like me and my husband are tall people. We're not little people. So she's big and strong. And when she gets a hold of something, especially sugar, her behaviors are immediately affected. And it's like you look at her And I'll talk to her. I'm like, sweetie, I know that right now you feel like you can't control your body. And I'll just say, this is why mommy doesn't eat sugar. This is why mommy doesn't eat those things. Cause I understand once you have a little bit, that's all your brain can think about. That's the only thing that your brain wants to do after you have a little bit. So that's why mom and dad don't necessarily let you have those things, because it makes you so upset. So anything from her behavior to sleep, she'll have self-aggressive behaviors. She's put her head through a window before. It's extreme. So, it's sad, but our family kind of understands that we don't usually go to a lot of family gatherings if they're going to have a big buffet of cookies and stuff out. We just don't go because it's too hard for her. So
yeah, that's tough. And you're an awesome mom for thinking of her and taking such good care of feeding her the right foods. I can't imagine what a struggle on a daily basis that is.
Thank you. We just don't keep it in the house. Like it doesn't come in the house, and we try to make our family fun. Like, we live in Atlanta, so we have pretty decent weather most of the year. So it's more about like, let's go on a hike. Let's go outside. Let's, do things as a family that have nothing to do with food. Like let's have fun doing that instead of let's go get ice cream to reward, or, kind of the way that I was raised of like, you had a bad day. Let's have some cake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just creates a totally different mental space for kids. I feel like, cause even adults totally still have that mentality around food and emotions and reward.
Yeah, they really do. And it takes years and years to break those patterns, and we have triggers. We're getting ready to go into the holidays, and it's like, carb, sugar, central, everything that you go to is centered around some kind of holiday party with food. And so I think the importance of having community and having support, especially right now, is so important, because we just need those reminders around us, because the rest of the world is going to be out there pushing the cakes and stuff. And I don't like how I feel when I have those foods. My depression and anxiety comes back very, very quickly.
Yeah, totally. And Sarah, what's something you're working on or looking forward to, both personally and professionally, that you can share?
Right now, I am kind of starting a process. I'm hoping to go to this advanced meditation teacher training. I'm not really sure how it's going to happen because I have to leave for 108 days, but I've just started some of the coursework for that, and I'm really excited to kind of shift more into teaching meditation. So I'm really excited about that. Just kind of baby steps towards like that big goal of eventually, spreading more meditation around and helping people learn how to do it and dispel a lot of myths about it. That's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like really huge, both personally and professionally. I'm sure it will be super interesting, and I'm looking forward to you sharing some of those learnings as well on your Instagram. And where can people find you? I'll link to all of this in the show notes at carnivorecast.com. But where can people find out more about you? And thanks again for coming on, Sarah. It's been really a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I pretty much live on my Instagram page. If people want to interact with me, it's at carnivore.yogi. And I just started a YouTube channel about a month ago. So I've got maybe like 11 or 12 videos up there. I don't respond to the comments so much on the YouTube. It's more on that on my Instagram where people can interact with me.
Great. Thanks so much. I'll link to both of those and really appreciate your time today, Sarah. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on Carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. and share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.